Okay, Bismillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. I pray you all well. Okay, let's start. Al-Fatiha. Alhamdulillah. اهدنا الصراط المستقيم صراط الذين أنعمت عليهم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما تعلمنا وزدنا من فضلك علما وعملا وقربا يا أرحم الراحمين. اللهم زدنا ولا تنقصنا وأكرمنا ولا تهنا وأعطنا ولا تحرمنا وآثرنا ولا تؤثر علينا وأرضنا وارض عنا يا أرحم الراحمين ويا أكرم الأكرمين ويا ذا الجلال والإكرام. Okay, Bismillah. Just a quick check. Any I believe we're all muted. Good. Okay, any audio issues on Zoom? It's not letting me select a mic. I don't know what's going on. But okay, great, excellent. Right, so Bismillah. Let us continue with our preamble, our muqaddimah or muqaddama. And if you look in the books of logic, they'll have a wajh for the kasra of muqaddima or the word, and a wajh for the fatha of the muqaddama. I'll leave you to look that up. So yeah, so looking at the school in order to understand why positions are given in different situations, different positions are chosen for varying situations, and why we have the concept of the mufta bihi of the school. And in some abwab the mufta bihi remains, and it's not changing. For example, the in the ibadat, the general mabna of the Masa'il, the backdrop of the Masa'il is that it's built on what's called ihtiyat, right? Precaution, because it's a matter of worship, your connection to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And because the ijtihad in the matters of Masa'il, it's different to the ijtihad in other issues, they don't change. The ijtihad in ibadat, right? Because the ibadat, it comes down to doing things the way the Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Sallu kama ra'aytumuni usalli. And this is based on the riwayat from the Sahaba. So for example, we say subhanakallahumma wa bihamdika for the thana, based on many riwayat from many of the Sahaba. We only do takbir once at the beginning, for example. Why? Because Abdullah ibn Mas'ud, one of the fuqaha of the Sahaba, he said in Kufa, the Prophet, this was the last thing the Prophet did, sallallahu alaihi wasallam. This is the way he prayed. So everything, this is how we look at the masail in ibadat. Now there can be some issues that do change, right? And with the hukum does change. But in the other abwab, we have situations where we have a narration from the Imam Abu Hanifa, for example, right? Allah. And this narration from Abu Hanifa will have, in some situations, it's based on how things were in his time, right? So his ijtihad, because we have his understanding of his legal methodology, and we have the illah, right? The basis for the legal ruling. If we look at masail, and sometimes they change over time. I'll give you an example. A lady who's past bulugh, she doesn't need in the original fatwa of the school, she can marry herself off without the presence or approval of a wali, and that was it. And so Sayyidah Aisha, she narrated the hadith, and she married her niece off, and that's the whole thing. In later times, as we see in the Lubab itself, it actually summarizes the whole bahth, where a lady, if she's marrying someone who isn't kufr, right? There's no kafa, there's no marital suitability between them, and she goes off and she marries this person without the approval of her wali, the nikah just doesn't take place. It just doesn't take place. So they can have the offer and the acceptance and the two witnesses and everything. There is no nikah, right? Why? Because times changed and there were problems in society, and so the whole thing of kafa'a is there to um, it's the whole point is you want marriages that that work, and it's not just the couple, it's the families. And sometimes when there's no suitability, such as if there's a vast difference in religiousness or profession, what can happen is you can just have fights, for example, or if the husband can't support her to her level, to the level of her, what she's used to in her father's house. So for example, there's a lady, and even with profession this comes in. Let's say there's a lady, and she's a doctor, for example, and she wants to marry, there's love or whatever, and she wants to marry someone who works in a takeaway, for example. It's a halal occupation, great, but there's a big difference in the income, and they might be happy with it initially, but later, when, for example, when they have a couple of children, she'll want to give the children gifts, or just the cot or whatever. She'll want to get things that are suited to her financial status, because she'll want good things for her child. The husband, if he can't provide like this, like what she's used to, there's going to be problems. So you have this whole thing of kafa'a for the two families to gel, not just the couple. And sometimes socially there are issues. People are mocked, or you married so and so, right? And if there's a basis for suitability in the Sharia, then it's ignored. But then there are certain things in society, for example, like we said, with profession and stuff, there's what you call ar, right, where people feel a stigma. So in this situation, if there's no kafa'a and she goes off and she marries someone without the approval of her wali, or the mahar, what she gets in the marriage is far below what's expected, then the wali can object, right? So in the past, what the wali would do, he'd go to the judge and he'd say, look, this has happened, she's married so and so, whatever. And based on these considerations in the Sharia, the mas'ala, the marriage would have been annulled. But then it came to a point where just the legal process was taking too long. It was difficult. Sometimes, for non-emergency cases, you might have to wait a year and these sorts of things. So there's all sorts of complications. So eventually the fatwa of the school became that if there's no kafa'a, then without the wali's agreement, then there is no nikah, right? And that's the fatwa, that's what it is. So this is just one example, right, where rulings change based on a number of factors. Now, it's interesting, just side point. Someone once messaged me, and he was having a rant. He was talking about, the deed is easy and all of this stuff, and it's a religion of ease. And I said, no, it's a religion of taklif, right? If it was meant to be absolute ease, it would have been created in paradise, right? There are rulings in the Sharia that were meant to apply, right? And yes, there is scope within the rules of the Sharia. There is, yuridullah bikum al-yusr, right? For when it comes to, for example, in the ayat of fasting. So, if you're ill, then okay, make it up later. But you can't just say, well, the religion wants ease, or and so basically, let's just just cancel all the rulings out completely. Let's just not fast. You get it? So it's like that. So there are certain parameters within which this ijtihad occurs, the application of the rulings. So we'll look at some of them, but this isn't the time for it, right? I'm just going to highlight it so it's known that they're there. But this really comes later when you study Rasm al-Mufti in detail. So which is the science of applying this, which we'll look at. So what we have is there are a couple of Masa'il that we need to look at, just so we're prepared when we read the text. You'll have names coming at you, you'll have issues coming at you, where you need to understand who is speaking, what they're speaking about, in order to understand the mas'ala. So what we're going to discuss here is part of a sub-science called Rasm al-Mufti, right? So the statute of the Mufti, or the methodology of the Mufti. What does Mufti mean? Um, Istafta for afta in the Arabic language. It means istafta, he asked a question, for afta, so he answered it. So a mufti is literally someone that gives an answer to a religious question. But in the parlance of the fuqaha, it means someone who is qualified, who understands the rulings, understands the ilal, and understands the application. Now, this is very important. You see people, so when it comes to fiqh, there are two issues. There's a riwayah and a diraya, as we talked about last Thursday, right? There's the riwayah of what is the position of the school, who said it, where we're taking it from. And then there's diraya, where you apply the school, right? Now you see the mujtahids, when when we have the Masa'il that come to us from the mujtahids, and more so when the Masa'il are presented in the texts, right? This is why, so for example, one of the conditions of someone to actually give a fatwa is that he has to have trained with fuqaha and taken his fuqaha from people, and so taken his fiqh from fuqaha, not someone who is, you could have a genius, right? And and this person is very intelligent and photographic memory, and he could read all the books of the Hanafis from beginning to end. He's not qualified to give a fatwa. It'd be haram for him to give a fatwa, right? Because you have to take your fiqh from a faqih, because this there are implications and understandings within the way texts are written, and if that's transmitted, even if you know a text inside out, it doesn't mean you're a faqih or a mufti, actually, right? It doesn't mean that you can answer questions, because part of the issue is translating what's in the text to real life, which means you have to understand the considerations of what's in the book and what's in society and how to apply them, right? So it's not just a case of, Matan al-Quduri says this, there you are, go. It might be in some situations what the fara'id of wudu, right? He mentions four, you can't make up a fifth, right? So it's just that. But then there are other situations where it's not the case, right? So you have this thing called Rasmul Mufti. And so what is it? So it's a branch of fiqh that looks at the practical application of the rulings based on the legal, based on the asl, right, the ilal fiqhiyya, the legal bases of these rulings being applied correctly in this context. And context makes a big difference, right? And so, for example, let me give you an example of when things change. The example you see in the classical books, for example, is I keep saying, for example, al-yamin, right? So Kitab al-Ayman, when it comes to swearing oaths. Now there are, in most chapters of fiqh, or practically all of them, there are overarching principles, and one of the principles in Kitab al-Ayman is that it's based on urf, right? So the example they say, for example, if a person says, he swears an oath, wallahi, he's not going to eat any laham, any meat, right? And if he goes and has a tuna sandwich, if he has some roasted chicken, right? Has he broken his oath or not? Right? So here it is. So if you look at it from a linguistic basis, and in Arabic, the word laham would apply to the flesh of any living thing. So yes, fish comes into it, chicken comes into it, right? But people don't look at these meanings. They don't, unless you're a expert in language or someone that works with a lot with language, haqiqa, majaz, these sorts of things. You won't look at the root meaning. So people look at the urfi meaning, right? And then when it comes to urf, there's an urf that is specific to a group of people. It's called urf khas and urf am. And so when you look at this, it's a case of, how do people understand the word lahm? If you go to the Arab world, for example, in Jordan and Syria, if you say lahm, they think you mean beef or lamb, or sheep in general, right? Cow and sheep meat. And if they don't include chicken in that. So if someone's in a place where he says, like for example here in the West, if someone says, a certain oath, I won't eat meat, it would include tuna, for example. It would include chicken, right? Because it's all classed as meat, even though fish is actually could be classed as a separate category. But anyway, um, but someone in the Arab world, if he swore the same oath and he ate chicken, there'd be a different ruling, right? So this is something that we understand like this. So Rasul Mufti is based on applying these, and in order to apply the rulings, there are certain considerations which I'm sure you've come across. For example, they say ad-darura, necessity. What is necessity? It has its own parameters, right? Haja, need, that has its own parameters. Raf'ul haraj, right? Lifting difficulty, that has its own parameters. Taysir, right? Parameters. Taghir zaman. Taghir zaman, for example, an example of that what I just mentioned is this ruling on the of nikah. Times change, right? Urf, right? And it's not just a case of things have changed, so therefore you're going to change the ruling. There are certain rulings that just will not change. Al-Imam Al-Alama Muhammad Amin Ibn Abidin, his Rasa'il, it's a beautiful collection of essays. He's got 2 volumes. It's worth getting hold of that. Rasa'il Ibn Abidin. But he's got a beautiful risala. I think it's called Nashrul Arf. Arf in the Arabic language means fragrance. So the spreading of a fragrance. It's about urf, which is legal rulings. It's this concept of the change of society. So one of the first things he mentions in that is that some people in a particular place, maybe builders or anyway, some people in a particular place, they were wearing their izar on their hips. So what do I mean? So when they wore their wrap around, the lungi, when they wore it, instead of it covering the area directly below their navel, it was showing the area, and it was hanging off their hips as opposed to above their waist. And so it was showing that area, and it became the custom of the people of a particular place. So are we going to say now in this situation that it's accepted and let them do what they want? No, right? And he makes it clear that here, because it's urf fasid, because it's contravening a direct nas or many nusus of the Sharia, right? So it's not applied here, right? So there's a whole element. We're not going to go into this, but there's a whole element of understanding this in the way that the rulings are applied. And someone that I remember, Shaykh Abdul-Rahim Reasat, the Turkish scholar, I used to study with. He used to say, لا تتجمدوا بما في الكتب. Don't become stuck with whatever's in the books. Meaning, or the context of that was meaning, don't take it literally, right? Understand the book, understand what the book's saying, the principle, and how it's applying it, and understand how to apply that principle. That's what was going on, right? So this Rasul Mufti, it has a basis in the Sharia. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, يُرِيدُ اللَّهُ بِكُمُ الْيُسْرَ وَلَا يُرِيدُ بِكُمُ الْعُسْرَ, right? And then, for example, about eating meat, right? So, or drinking wine. There's إِلَّا مَا اضْطُرِرْتُمْ إِلَيْهِ. If you're dying, then clearly you can eat the flesh of a swine or drink wine to save your life, right? So we have a number of these issues, and then, for example, the transmission of an illah, right, where the Prophet ﷺ is talking about a cat that innaha laysat binajisa or laysat binajis. A cat is not najis, right? Why? Even though it's a carnivore, normally we say carnivores are anything that their saliva touches is impure, but a cat is a carnivore. It will eat mice, for example. Well, he said, إِنَّمَا هِيَ مِنَ الطَّوَّافِينَ عَلَيْكُمْ أَوْ طَوَّافَاتُ. He said, clearly it's one of the things that they keep wandering around you, meaning cats, they like being around people, and they spend their time in people's homes, and the fact that they're always there, right, for someone who owns a cat, for example, or in many places, like Turkey, cats are everywhere, and so you can't avoid them, right? Like in the past, people would you'd get insects in the house, right? Sometimes people get ants or beetles or whatever, and if they go into your food, if they we're talking about hygiene is one thing, right? When we're talking about purity and impurity, which is another thing. And if you found them in a bag of rice that you had, a couple of them, you take them out, you could wash the rice, but can you eat that rice? So can we apply this the ruling of the cat to these things, right? Which is yes. Why? Because they're the tawafin. They have this illah of, they remain within the house. They're hard to get rid of completely. In modern times, it's easier. But even then, here in summer, the spiders come out and stuff, right? So things like that. So here we have this. So we have, for example, Imam Ibn Abidin. He said an interesting quote. He says, وكثير, it's talking about the Masa'il, right? وكثير منها ما يبينه المجتهد على ما كان في عرف زمانه. There are many Masa'il that are based on the urf, of his time. بحيث لو كان في زمان العرف الحادث لقال بخلاف ما قاله أولا. So meaning that if the mujtahid, the riwayah we have might be one particular riwayah, but had he been in our time, he would have seen this issue and he would have given a different position. So you could almost summarize it, and I believe this is something he mentions in his text, Sharh Uqud Rasul Mufti, that it's the fatwa is a case of what would Imam Abu Hanifa himself say about a matter if he was here now, right? So it might vary from what's in the other works. So that's basically it. And Allah, and like I said, this is understood through after understanding the text, after having access to the text, understanding the ilal and what the texts are based on, and the masail and the principles, and then there's an practical application. So yeah, subhanallah. So there's a text, Munyatul Mufti, not Munyatul Musalli, different text. So Munyatul Mufti by Imam Yusuf ibn Ahmad as-Sajistani, who died in 638. He said, if a man memorized all of our books, then even then he has to train with someone to answer, to issue rulings, right? Because many of the rulings are answered according to the situations of the time the authors were in, right? So that's a very important point that we need to understand. So anyway, let's move on slightly. So here's a central point, that rulings change based on time, place, and people, right? And there are other factors, but very important point to know. So what we doing then? So we're looking at here, if we're looking at the school and how, because you've got many narrations and you've got our later works that we have, and there are some key works that we're going to mention a number of works now. For example, works written by Imam Muhammad. In our times, we have references that the Talibul Ilm and the Faqih would go to first, right? So if you have a question on Iman, for example, oaths, don't go opening up, the books of Imam Muhammad. If you haven't looked at, for example, the Hashi of Ibn Abdin Rad al-Muhtar, if you haven't looked at Al-Bahr Ra'iq, if you haven't looked at Al-Hidayah, if you haven't looked at, the Shuruh of Quduri, we have books, because what they've done, they've refined the school, right? So, but when they do refine the school, if you read the works of Ibn Abdin, you're going to come across a lot of quotes and narrations and whatever. So just to have, and even in this text, so just to have an understanding of what they call the tabaqatul masail, right? The arrangement of the masail and where they come from and their strength. This is what we look at, right? So when it comes to the tabaqatul masail, we have three tabaqat, right? Three levels. The masail al-usul, Masa'il al-Nawadir, and al-Fatawa wal-Waqi'at. So Masa'il al-Usul, these are the Masa'il that were written and compiled from Imam Abu Hanifa, Imam Abu Yusuf, and Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, in the books of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. Then you've got the Nawadir, which some are from Imam Muhammad, some are from Imam Abu Yusuf, some are from, as we see the names of the book, some are from Imam Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i, right? So these, the difference between the first and the second tabaqat or طبقتين, is the strength of the riwayah, right? And we'll look at that. And then you have al-fatawa and al-waqi'at. So these are situations where there's no nas from any of the mujtahid imams, right? Nor their students, nor their students. So the first few generations of the school, starting from Abu Hanifa, where there were mujtahids, right? Either him being the mujtahid mutlaq, as were his students, or mujtahideen muntasibeen. So there's no direct riwayah. So the ulama after them, based on their principles, based on their approach, and the ilal from other, sometimes it was just pure ijtihad directly from the Quran and the Sunnah, using the tools of Abu Hanifa. And sometimes there was no direct answer, but there was a similar issue. So based on the takhrij of the the principles from that masala, they would derive another one, right? So they were known as al-fatawa and al-waqi'at, right? So let's just move on. Let's look at the first group. The first group, you have this term zahirul riwaya, right? And so just a quick nahu point, can't resist. Zahirul riwaya, this is idafatu sifa ila al-mawsuf, right? Because what we're saying is a riwayatu zahira. So zahir, that which is apparent. So compared to this, the others are hidden, right? So it's like you say, Allahumma bi'azimi fadlik adkhilni fi rahmatik, for example. Oh Allah, by your tremendous generosity, what you're actually saying, bifadlika al-azim. So you take the sifa and you make it the mudaf of the mawsuf, right? Bi'azimi fadlik, so meaning bifadlika al-azim. So here, al-riwayat al-zahira becomes zahirul riwayah. And what is zahirul riwayah? Zahirul riwayah are the main books of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, which we're going to look at, right? And these books, these six, you could say seven, but these books were narrated from Imam Abu Hanifa, either the mutawatir from him or the mustafidat, right? Riwayat mustafidah, or mashhur as they call it, right? So we're very confident that very confident in the strength of the riwayat and narrations from Imam Abu Hanifa and Imam Muhammad of these books. Why Imam Muhammad? Why is he so significant? So as you know, Imam Abu Hanifa, the majority of he taught a number of students who were mujtahids, but the most prominent student was Imam Abu Yusuf. And towards the end of the life of Abu Hanifa, there was a young man from Harasta, right? Harasta, a nice little village in Syria, just outside of Damascus. I visited it once, and it's a very beautiful place. Anyway, so he's from Harasta, and his father, their family was from there. His father ended up in Kufa, and so this young man went up to Imam Abu Hanifa in the mosque, and he said, "Look, if someone's prayed Isha, and then he sleeps, and then he has his first wet dream, so he becomes baligh at that point, does he need to repeat Isha or not?" And this is the next day, and I think around Fajr time or something. So Imam Abu Hanifa said yes, he needs to, right? Because there was no wujub then, and then once he becomes baligh, there is wujub, right? The same with Hajj. You can do a Hajj before you baligh enough, but then after bulugh, you got to do the Hajjatul Islam. So so he watched this young man went off to the corner of the mosque, and he made up that prayer, like watching him. So he saw this, he's an intelligent young man, and he's got he's got potential, he's got concern for deen. So Imam Abu Hanifa started teaching him, and he was funding him. Abu Hanifa was financing his studies. Shortly after Abu Hanifa passed, he did study with Abu Hanifa for a while, and he took a lot from him. But he passed away, and then so Imam Muhammad continued studying with Abu Yusuf. And so there's a strong relationship between these three imams, the strength of their riwayah, the strength of their fiqh and their understanding, and the tawfiq that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave. Abu Hanifa didn't want the position of qada, so he went, and we know that story, and he passed away, rahimahullah ta'ala. After him, Harun al-Rashid, the Khalifa, appointed, was it him? No, I could be wrong. Don't quote me on that. I think it was. he appointed Imam Abu Yusuf as Qadi al-Qudah, right? The judge who appoints all the other judges, right? And obviously, he was appointing the students of Abu Hanifa. And so these people would, this is one of the reasons why, there was so much tawfiq for the Hanafi school. It spread throughout the Muslim world. I said you'd say 70-80% of the Ummah were Hanafi because of this, right? And so Imam Muhammad still continued teaching and studying, and so he authored some works, and he was told to author some works by Imam Abu Yusuf, as we'll see. So so the riwayat of the books of Zahirul Riwayah are a lot stronger. Then we'll talk about the other riwayat of the other books, but they weren't as strong. So what are the books of Zahirul Riwayah? And when we looked last time, we looked at how Mukhtasar al-Quduri affected all the mutun and the shuruh after it. So here basically we're going to see how the books of Zahir al-Riwayah affected the books and the early shuruh that even the books of Fatawa and everything, how they affected the early madhab. So for example, there's one of the texts, it might have been Al-Jami' al-Jami' al-Saghir. It might have been Al-Jami' al-Saghir. There was a point in the Ummah where a judge could not be appointed as a judge unless he had memorized Al-Jami' al-Saghir. And then later in the Ottoman Empire, in time of the Ottomans, I believe in the Ottomans, Dr. Salah al-Hajj, he told us that in that time, it was Sharh al-Wiqaya. Someone who had memorized Sharh al-Wiqaya would be allowed to become a judge, because you need to have isti'ab, you need to have an understanding and a grasp of a number of Masa'il from each bab, right? So you could have a faqih, he understands all the Masa'il, but maybe Kitab al-Musaqat, Musaqah, how often do those issues come up, right? And although I remember my friend Sheikh Faraz Khan, he once mentioned, I think he went home to Texas, and there's some Masail when it came to like drilling oil, and it was very similar to those Masail, so they had some qiyas on those issues. But there are certain abwab that someone that doesn't engage with fiqh directly, constantly, it's normal, you forget that Masail, right? But someone that's a judge, where you're gonna get, so you forget, so you have to go review them, like the night before Eid, or people are reviewing the ahkam of Salat al-Eid. When Hajj time comes, it's a good time to review it, because you're gonna get questions. It's like that. So what happened is, in the Ottoman times, you memorize Sharh al-Wiqaya, right? You know this book. Obviously, you study the other works, but if you're going to be a judge, you have to have this book, or I think at least the Wiqaya down. So you've got a reference point for the issues that come up. So with the books of Zahir al-Riwayah, they're the books of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani, right? And the first one is called Al-Mabsut, right? Al-Mabsut, which means the expanded. So it's a very, very big detailed book. It's also called Al-Asl, right? And it's a huge work. It's actually been printed. It was printed recently, not that recent, maybe 2012, 2011. It was printed in Turkey. And I remember, not long ago when the Hagia Sophia, when the church was returned to the status of a mosque, the Imam that was chosen for it, he's the muhakkik of that work, right? And Allah reward him abundantly. So Al-Mabsut, and so Imam Muhammad radiallahu anhu, he didn't sit down and write an individual a full book on this. What he wrote shorter books on the abwab of fiqh, right? So for example, there was Kitab al-Buyu', there was Kitab al-Ayman, Kitab al-Ikrah, these sorts of things, and then all of these works were then compiled, right, after that into one big book, right? And there's an interesting quote here narrated. So Imam Khatib al-Baghdadi, he mentions from Ali al-Hassan ibn Dawood, one of the early scholars, he said, فخر أهل البصرة بأربعة كتب. Now the people, because there was Basra and Medina were, there's actually an interesting term now called Amsar, singular of Misr. And Misr, so you got Misr, which is غير منصرف, which means Egypt. And then you've got Misr, which is Munsarif, Misrin. This is basically, it was started off as an encampment for the Muslims when they moved into Iraq and after the campaigns, and started off as an encampment, and then they developed into cities, right? And then non-Muslims came and everyone started living there. So the two main ones were the Basra and Kufa, and there was a lot of rivalry between them. And when it came to, for example, you got the Basran school of Nahu and the Kufan school, and they had various approaches and various scholars. So he said, so this person said that the fakhr of Basra, they're really proud of 4 books: Kitab al-Hayawan and Al-Bayan wa Tabeen by Jahil, right? A Mu'tazili expert in the Arabic language, right? And by Al-Kitab by Sibawayh, his book in Nahu, and the book Al-Ain by his teacher Khalil ibn Ahmad Al-Farahidi, and giants, right? And he says, and we, meaning the people of Kufa, نفتخر ب27 ألف مسألة في الحلال والحرام علمها رجل من أهل كوفة. We're proud of 27,000 issues of halal and haram, which people are in need of, maybe not individually but collectively, that one man knows about. Right? It's really interesting because it's just going on to the ikhtilafat. There was a lot of ikhtilaf. Like, for example, when you study Nahu, you study the Basran school, the Kufan school. What's going on in Nahu, the Basran school have an approach, which is they like to look at Arabic in general and they like to make a qaida. Yeah? And the qaida is the most important thing to them. So once they've got the qaida, anything that doesn't fit it, there'll be some exceptions, which, لا يقاس عليه, for example. This is Arabic usage, but you can't make up another terkib like it. And that's what they'll say. And then anything that doesn't fit their qaida is shadh. That's their approach. And you have to be more, anyway, even when it comes to, for example, in the Quran, just to fit with the ruh of the language, sometimes you have to take the Kufan position. The Kufans they had qawaid and they were fine with that, but they were more open to other positions and other interpretations, and saying, look, there's this, Arabs have used it. By Arabs you mean anyone from before the time of the Prophet to 200 years after. Anyone after that, the Arabic wasn't counted as a hujjah. So Arabs have used it. What's the problem, right? So for example, the Kufans, إذا السماء انشقت, right? So إذا السماء, right, انشقت. So according to the Basrans, the fi'l comes before the fa'il, right? So they have a taqdeer, إذا انشقت السماء انشقت, right? So the taqdeer of انشقت first. Whereas the Kufans are fine. Look, Arabs have used it, إذا السماء انشقت, and done, right? So when it comes to taqdeer and when it comes to all of these things, it's not like you have to be Basran or that's it, end of the world. Anyway, we're going to a different science now. Let's come back to fiqh. Why would I mention this? Because one of the great scholars of the Kufans was Al-Kisa'i. Al-Kisa'i was a polymath, expert in many fields, Arabic and qira'at and many things. And he was actually the first cousin of Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. So Imam Muhammad once asked him, he said, look, you're very intelligent, why don't you learn fiqh and benefit people like that, like learn fiqh to a high degree? So he said, look, once you've got a deep grasp of one science, you can figure the rest out. So Imam Muhammad's like, how did you figure that out? Where did you get that from? So he gave him an issue of, what if someone makes a mistake in the prayer and he does a sujood sahu? In that sajda to sahu, he makes a mistake. What does he do? He said he doesn't do a second sajda to sahu. That's sufficient. And So he said, how did you figure that out? He said, التصغير لا يصغر. When you do tasghir or something, um, al-muwaylid, a little mawlid, for example, right? Then you can't do that a second time to that word. It's done. So anyway, a lot of giants. So Imam Muhammad wrote the book Al-Mabsut, and huge, amazing work. And so there's a narration. So Imam At-Tahtawi mentions it in the beginning, in the Muqaddimah of his Hashia Maraq al-Falah, where one of the Ahl Kitab, a Hakim from the Ahl Kitab, he read the Mabsut of Imam Muhammad, and he must have understood something of how brilliantly he's laid things out. And he said هذا كتاب محمدكم الأصغر. This is the book of your lesser Muhammad, i.e. Al-Hasan ibn al-Hasan al-Shaybani. فكيف كتاب محمدكم الأكبر. So what about the book of your greater Muhammad, i.e. the Messenger of Allah sallallahu alayhi wasallam. So there's a number of shuruh on this, such as it was narrated by, there are a number of shuruh, but it was narrated by Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzajani, right, who narrates most of these books, of the 6 books of Zahirul Riwayah, and Muhammad ibn Sama'a, and Abu Hafs al-Kabir al-Bukhari. He was a contemporary of Imam al-Bukhari. Okay. So Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzajani, his nuskha is the one that's most famous. There's a couple of stories regarding that, but let's leave that. Okay, there's a name that you'll come across in the Lubab called, they'll say Shaykh al-Islam Khawahir Zada or Khawhar Zada. The difference in how you say it. So it's written as Khawahir or Khawahar Zada, and so he's got a big sharh called Al-Mabsut Al-Kubra. Shams al-A'imma Al-Halwani, he's got a sharh on it as well. Right, next book, Al-Jami' al-Saghir, and this is the work that I told you that Sahib al-Hidayah Ali ibn Abi Bakr, Burhanuddin Ali ibn Abi Bakr al-Marghani, he blended this, he merged, he added the matan of Quduri to this text and commented on both. This is why if you want Jami' al-Saghir, you're better off going to the Hidayah, because there's ilal, there's explanation, there's more, there's commentaries on it. So he wrote this work. Imam Shamsul Aimah Sarakhsi, he said that the reason why Imam Muhammad wrote this is that Imam Abu Yusuf said to him, compile a book for me, because obviously Abu Yusuf is busy with other matters. So you compile a book for me regarding the things I've narrated to you from Abu Hanifa. So Abu Hanifa's positions. Now this makes a lot more sense. So Imam Muhammad is writing a book about the riwayat that he took from Abu Yusuf about what Abu Hanifa's positions were. And the school is bigger than Abu Hanifa, as we know. So in the other works, like in Al-Mabsut and in the other works, Imam Muhammad will mention his position. He'll mention Abu Yusuf's positions, right? But here it's just about Abu Hanifa. This is why when we said that the Al-Mutun Mawdu'atun li-naqli madhhab al-Imam, right? That the matans, the whole purpose is to transmit the Imam's school, right? This is where we get it from. So when Abu Yusuf read it, he's very impressed with it. He said, and so I think someone took it to him. He read it. He was impressed, and he said, "Great, except he's made a mistake in a few issues." They say either 3 or 6. I think it was 6 issues, and so in Al-Bahr al-Ra'iq, Ibn Nujaym, in Bab al-Witr and Nawafil, so he mentions all these issues, these 6 issues. So Imam Muhammad said, "No, I did not make a mistake." Right? What happened is, Abu Yusuf narrated a position, these 6 positions of Abu Hanifa to Imam Muhammad. He'd memorized them. Later he wrote them down, but Abu Yusuf had forgotten the riwayah, right? Hence, in like if you look at in the science of hadith, in Nuzhat al-Nazar and other places, there's a whole discussion about a riwayah, or maybe in the Muqaddim of Ibn Salah, there's a discussion on the riwayah of a riwayah which you took from someone, but then they forget it, and then you narrate it back to them. There's a whole discussion around this. So this is Kitab al-Mabsut. This is Al-Jami' al-Saghir, right, by Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan Shaybani. So yeah, this is a text that, like I said, in order to be appointed as a qadi, you had to memorize this book. So Allah. So with the riwayat in this book, there are some that are only mentioned in this book. There are some that are mentioned. That's first category. Second, there are some riwayat that are mentioned in other books, and then the third category in Al-Jami' al-Saghir are riwayat that are mentioned in other books, but they're reworded in this book. And in the rewording, there's another benefit and there's another point of knowledge that comes about, right? And so, in excellent work. And there was a lot of inayah from the ulama of the school on this work. And Allah. Okay. So some of the shuruh, Shamsul Aima al-Sarakhsi, yeah, sorry, Imam al-Tahawi had a sharh on it, but they say that this is Imam Muhammad al-Jami' al-Saghir was his penultimate book, the second to last book that he wrote. The last one was As-Sir al-Saghir. Yeah. I don't know why he's mentioned this point. Anyway, so Imam al-Tahawi's got a sharh on it. Abu Bakr al-Jassas has got a sharh on it. Zahir, I believe it might be Zahir al-Din. No, Zahir al-Balkhi. Qadi Khan has a sharh on it. Sadr al-Shaheed. And Shaykh al-Islam, Fakhr al-Islam. I think there were two brothers. Maybe Fakhr al-Islam. One is called Abu al-Yusr and the other one is called Abu al-Usr, because his wording was quite difficult to get. Al-Bazdawi, or as Shaykh Abdul-Rahim Reasat, he used to say Al-Pazdawi, because it's Pazdawi originally, or in Arabic they make it into a ba. And okay, and Abu Ja'far al-Hindwani. All of these are very early scholars, around the 3rd, 4th, 5th centuries, with commentaries on this work. Next, we have the third book of Zahir al-Riwayah, which is Al-Jami' al-Kabir. Now this work is a work, obviously, this is a work of absolute genius, right? So, there's, Imam Akmaluddin al-Babarti, the author of Al-Inayah. So, side point, Al-Inayah is the best commentary on the Hidayah from the perspective of understanding the text. As for looking at the discussions of the Hidayah, building upon them and other things, Fathul Qadir probably takes the amazing work. But Al-Inayah, in order to understand the text of the Hidayah without too much tawassu and looking here and there and everywhere, the Inayah is the best text. His ibarat are clear, explains things very well, explains terminology. It's an excellent work. So Imam al-Babarti, when he's when he's talking about this work, he said, "Huwa kasmihi." هو كاسمه لجلائل مسائل الفقه جامع كبير قد اشتمل على عيون الروايات ومتون الدرايات بحيث كاد أن يكون معجزا ولتمام لطائف الفقه منجزا شهد بذلك بعد انفراد العمر فيه واردوه. People that spend their whole lives on this book, understanding this book, trying to get it, they all testified, right? So they said there's no book like it. It's incredibly detailed, it's incredibly difficult. So someone said that Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan is like someone who built a building with multiple floors, right? And each floor, when he was building it, he built a stairway, or there were ladders there, whatever, to climb onto the higher levels. And once he'd completed the building, he demolished all the stairs, right? So, and then it's like he said, "Sha'nukum fas'adu," right? If you want, climb it. You figure out how to climb, basically. It's just, so Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari said, وَالْحَقُّ إِنَّ هَذَا الْكِتَابَ آيَةٌ فِي الْإِبْدَاعِ. It's a sign in ingenuity, tremendous miracle, right? You could say. وينطوي على دقة بالغة في التفريع على قواعد اللغة وأصول الحساب. Beautiful. And there's really real precision in تفريع المسائل, taking an issue and then developing other مسائل, deducing them from it based on language. Why language? Because here you are, in usul al-fiqh, there's the mabhath that the Hanafis invented, basically, huruf al-ma'ani, right? What's the difference between in, what's the difference between idha, what is, and how does that affect, fiqhi riwayat. In ataytu al-makkata fa-abdi hur, right? إذا أتيت المكة مكة فعبدي حر. There's a difference, and when it comes to marriage, divorce, especially this mu'allaq talaqs, which they seem to have liked doing, right? There's loads of issues on this. Like if you go here, if you do this, if you enter someone's house, and then all those riwayat. So just amazing, right? Literally an amazing. And this is what separates the men from the boys, basically, and these ulama were the men, right? We're just trying to tatafful, just trying to pick some things off that suited to our level. But honestly, Al Jami' Al Kabir, amazing work, right? And so people spent their lives in this book. They said lam yusannaf mithluhu, right? People have said. So Shamsul A'imma As-Sarakhsi, he said, من أراد امتحان المتبحرين في الفقه فعليه بأيمان الجامع. Whoever wants to test, those who are experts in fiqh, okay, then go show them this chapter, Kitab al-Ayman, right? So obviously Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzajani, Abu Hafs al-Kabir, and Muhammad ibn Sama and a few others, they narrated this book from Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan al-Shaybani. So because of its complexity, there are a number of shuruh on it. Let's see some common names. So Imam, what is it? Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Tahawi, no, Imam Abu Ja'far. So Abu Amr Ahmad ibn Muhammad al-Tabari, not the Mufassir. Abu Bakr al-Jassas, he's got a sharh on it. Muhammad ibn Ali, who's known as Abdak al-Jurjani, Shamsul A'imma al-Halwani, and Shamsul A'imma al-Sarakhsi, Fakhr al-Islam Ali al-Bazdawi, Sadr al-Shahid Husamuddin. You see these names in the Lubab. And then you've got the author of so Imam Burhanuddin Mahmud ibn Ahmad, who wrote al-Muhit al-Burhani, and Hussein ibn Mansur al-Awzjandi, he's mentioned in the Lubab. Okay, and Burhanuddin Ali ibn Abi Bakr Abdul Jalil al-Marghinani, the author of the Hidayah. And anyway, so here we are, right? Next work, Allah, Ziyadat and Ziyadatu Ziyadat, right? What are these two works? So these are basically Masa'il that when Imam Muhammad ibn Hassan was writing Al-Jami' al-Kabir, he left out some Masa'il that just didn't come to mind. So he authored another work compiling them as Ziyadat, and then he realized that there are more works, there are more furu' that he forgot. So he added these furu' as well in Ziyadatu Ziyadat. I don't think it's in the structure or the order, the sequence of the books of fiqh, and so that's a common work. Ya Rab. A number of shuruh on this: Abu Nasr al-Attabi, Burhanuddin ibn Mazah, Tajuddin al-Kardari, Abu Hafs Sirajuddin al-Hindi, Shamsul A'imma al-Halwani, and Shamsul A'imma al-Sarakhsi, and a number of others wrote commentaries on it. And then we've got As-Siyar As-Saghir, right? So as you know, Siyar, plural of seerah. And so what this bab refers to is the ahkam of jihad and the ahkam of um, international relations, right? Alaqat al-duwal, so international relations, so warfare, politics, and a number of other topics that are connected to these in a broader sense and in a closer sense. Okay, so right, so this work, they say that this work was a talkhis of what Imam Abu Hanifa narrated to Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad and Imam Zufar and Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i and Hafs ibn Ghiyath al-Nakha'i, a number of other scholars. So, so what they did is they compiled these. So Imam Muhammad compiled these narrations, and so they're all narrated to him, right? So what happened is a number of students of Abu Hanifa um, within this bab composed a book like this. So Hassan ibn Ziyad and the others that I mentioned, they all wrote their book, but the only one that's actually been transmitted to us because of the standing and rank of Imam Muhammad, and his books were exceptional, right? So his is the only one that was actually transmitted to us. So I won't go too much into this, but there are a lot of things. So what happened is when he wrote this book, there's a famous story that Imam Abdul-Rahim ibn Amr al-Awza'i, who was in Beirut, and he was a mujtahid. He was a mujtahid mutlaq, contemporary of Imam Muhammad. But the problem was that his school and the school of the likes of Layth ibn Sa'ad and others, their schools were not preserved. Their students didn't preserve their schools, so they were valid madhabs, but they just didn't remain. And the only ones that ended up remaining were the four that we know today, right? So anyway, so he read this, he saw this work, and he said, who's this book? And so they said Muhammad al-Iraqi, meaning him, Imam Muhammad. He said, why are Ahlul Iraq, why are the people of Iraq writing about the seer, right? So books about the life and the battles and of the Prophet ﷺ and the ahkam connected to them, why are they writing about them? The people that are experts in this are the people of Sham and the Hijaz, not the Iraqis, right? And he said, because it was a later conquest. So Imam Muhammad heard about this, so he freed up some time, and and so he wrote Al-Jami' al-Kabir, and what he did is it was basically an expansion of Al-Jami' al-Saghir with many riwayat. So when Imam al-Awza'i actually came across this work, he was just awestruck by the book, and he said, if it wasn't for the fact that he's quoting hadiths, I would have said that the people of Iraq, they make up knowledge. But he's obviously got proof for this. So Allah, there is something, it's worth. So Sheikh Zahid al-Kawthari has got excellent short biographies of the Imams of the school. Husn al-Taqadi, for example, fi Sirati Abu Yusuf al-Qadi, and there's one, so he's got one on Abu Yusuf and one on Imam Muhammad, and it seems there was an issue. Some of the ulama say that they had a bit of a falling out, or Imam Muhammad got a bit upset with him, with Imam Abu Yusuf. Abu Yusuf was with the Qadi, with the Khalifa, and I think the Khalifa wanted to see Imam Muhammad, and so Abu Yusuf sent for him, and so I think the people that went to get Imam Muhammad, these soldiers, they just grabbed him and they took him. And you can imagine, it's like, the police coming and taking you, not knowing why you're being called, what we done, what's going to happen, where you're going, all of these things. And they took him, and there's a few details in that book, and Allahu A'lam. But they say that Imam Muhammad was a bit upset with him at that point. So when he was writing this book, he doesn't say Abu Yusuf, he said Akhbarani thiqa, right? and it's normal. It's human beings, right? And people can get hurt. It's just one of those things, right? And so Allahu Alam, although some of the ulama have questioned this, but that's basically the last work, right? Al-Jami Asir Al-Kabir, right, in this topic. So these are the books of Zahir al-Riwaya, and the works of the school after these books summarize their positions, right, or comment on them or expand on them. But like I said, for a talib, it's, I mean, if you want to buy these books, great. But a talib al-ilm at this point, what you should be doing is, you acquire the main books of the school. There are two documents which I'm sure Sheikh Faraz won't mind. I used to have them. I don't know whether there are two documents. There's one document which Sheikh Faraz wrote a number of years ago. I actually looked at this document. It helped me a lot. When I went to the Middle East. So he said it was called A Novice's Dream, and he laid out a whole curriculum, what to study, and then at when and at which point you start studying this and usul and qawaid and all of these things. And that is an excellent text. And then there's another text which he mentioned, in which he's mentioned some important works that a person should purchase. And Sheikh Ali Hani, there's this what's it called? There's the TARDIS. Doctor Who. I used to watch it as a kid or something. So it's like a little phone box, and then you walk in, and it's like a massive lab or something. Sheikh Ali Hani's library is like the TARDIS. And a number of times when you studied something with Sheikh Ali, what he did, the first lesson would be just going through the books of that science. I asked him once in Ramadan, let's do an intensive. Can you teach us a Shadh al-Arf in Sarf? And he's like, okay. So I was there, read up, prepared the lesson, turned up, and for the whole hour or so, he's just showing us his Sarf books. There's this, and then there's this, and there's this. This is important for this reason. This is important for that reason. And he used to say something, which, mashallah, my dear brother and friend, Sheikh Muhammad Ali, he'd appreciate this now. He used to say something, Shira'ul Kutub Nisful Ilm. Buying books is half of knowledge. Why? Reading it is a different story though. But buying the there's a brother, he once came to Amman, and he's from the UK, and he's like, could you take me book shopping? I was like, okay. So I went, I took him to the bookshops, and he bought the Hashia. He bought Rad al-Muhtar, the Hashia Ibn Abidin. And so obviously a big book. He bought the Dar al-Ma'rifah edition with 12 volumes. So got a bit of weight and whatever. So he came and he went to his flat where he was staying. And he told me this later. And he's like, his wife had to go at him. Like, why you bought so many books? And he's like, Abdul-Rahim made me buy them. I go, it's alright, don't worry. So he blamed me for them. But yeah, so why? Because when you have the books of a science, okay, this leads on to that, and you have a full perspective on them, right? And you have a roadmap, you could say. So yeah, I did show that document again a couple of years ago. I showed you Sheikh Faraz, and I said, he did express thoughts on updating it and adding things to it, and I wish he does. So I'll ask him first before sharing the document. I'll share the other document where there's a list of the books worth buying and the editions and stuff. It's an old document. I'm sure he might have some a number of thoughts, but there are certain things that are like constants in life, and for example, the books printed by DKI generally, although it's an exception, it's not always the case, but generally, their editions are not great. Although it depends on who actually did the editing. Anyway, so he warns against certain copies and stuff in there. But I'll bring you up with him. He's a very busy individual. Allah reward him for all of his efforts, with the ummah and everything he does. So I really do hope he gets a chance to update it because that would be a great asset. So how did when we talk about books? Yeah. So yeah, in our times we have the books of the mutaakhirin. Don't dump them and start going to other works. For example, Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi, he's got a sharh on, I think, a Jami' al-Saghir. You won't find it as beneficial as you will when you're ready for it, as you will, like for example, the Hidayah, right? So just bear that in mind. Next, we have Masa'il of An-Nawadir. So what are An-Nawadir? An-Nawadir are a number of books. Those are the top four are narrated by Imam Muhammad. Al-Kaysaniyat, the Haruniyat, Jurjaniyat, and Raqiyat. These books are the books of Imam Muhammad. The riwayah of these books are not from people like Abu Sulaiman al-Jawzijani, they're from other people, and hence they're not as strong, and we don't have as many chains to them, and they're not as strong. Like I said, the first category are either mutawatir or mashhura, right? So that's where the madhab is really taken from and its positions. However, in some situations, the books of Nawadir, some of these positions, the ulama do take. For example, you've got Al-Mujarrad, and I believe this position will be from there, but there's the issue of a ta'ajjul in Hajj, where you can either stay 3 days or stay 2 days and then do the Rami early and go. So the Zahiri Riwayah position is that you have to do it because you need to leave before Maghrib, right? So the Zahiri Riwayah position from Abu Hanifa is that you have to do it after Dhuhr. There's a riwayah from Hassan ibn Ziyad al-Lu'lu'i is that you can do it after Fajr comes in, right? Which makes life so much easier for people, right? Especially nowadays especially when there's loads of crowds and so taking that position is a big taysir in this, and in the Hidayah you'll notice he takes this position, right? So that's what it is. So Imam Hassan ibn Ziyad narrates Al-Mujarrad, that's a text that goes up to him. And then you've got Al-Amali. Amali is plural of Imla. Imla is basically dictation, right? So the teacher, it was a tradition of the earlier scholars. A teacher would sit and he just talk, extemporaneous, talking about a topic, and the students would be there writing it all down. And then what they would do later is they would compile all their notes together into a book. So this is it. But like I said, the riwayah isn't as strong as that of Zahiru riwayah. So and then we've got the third tabaqa of books, which is the fatawa works. So there are many of these fatawa works, right? And so a couple of books, they're not actually fatawa works here, but these books will summarize the fatawa, such as Al-Muhit al-Burhani, which has been printed in recent times, Al-Muhit al-Ridawi. So it seemed like, for example, Imam Ibn Abidin, when he talks about Al-Muhit al-Burhani, it seems like, as some scholars have suggested, it seems like that he didn't have access to the text in his time. It has been printed in our time, a couple of prints, but he says that it compiles many riwayat, and the author didn't categorize them. Zahir riwayah, Nawadir, fatawa. Allahu a'lam. But it seems like Al-Muhit al-Burhani does do this. It's the next one, Al-Muhit al-Ridawi. So this is by Radiyuddin al-Sarakhsi. So Al-Muhit al-Ridawi, he doesn't do this, right? He just has all the riwayat. A later work, I have a copy. There's an old Indian print of it with the Fatawa of Imam al-Laknawi in the Hamish of Khulasatul Fatawa. That's a summary of a lot of these discussions. So you have that work. So that's so these are the three tabaqat, right? And like the works of, for example, there's a work called they were referred to the books of Waqi'at, the incident on Nawazil, right? Waqi'at al-Muftin, for example. You've got the Waqi'at of An-Natifi, right? So that's a commonly quoted book. Al-Waqi'at of Sadr al-Shaheed, right? These were the type of fatawa work. So this is basically what the later books summarize, and it really makes sense for especially there's a huge blessing in the shuruh that we have of the later shuruh. of the school, where they summarize these. Like I said, remember what I mentioned about Ad-Durarul Hukam, Durrul Hukam by Mullah Khusro, where he got the text of Sharh al-Wiqaya, rewrote it, and because Sharh al-Wiqaya, it's a terse text, it's not easy to navigate, right? It's not bedtime reading, let me just tell you that. You need to be really focused. It's like that with most fiqh books, but some less so than others, right? And so he rewrote that, and then he added the Masa'il from these earlier these Fatawa works that were not there in Zahir al-Riwayah. So this is what the school has. So this is the riwayah of the madhab like this, and inshallah this will give a lot of clarity that when you do come across the texts that are quoted in the Lubab, or when you talk about Shaykh Islam Khawahir Zada and he's got this Sharh of Jami' Saghir, that you have an idea. Otherwise it's just a list of names and a list of books, right? And it doesn't help, right? It can be quite confusing. There is one other issue, which is, there are a couple of other issues I do want to discuss that will help our entry into this mini Rasm al-Mufti discussion that we've been having. There's a question of the Tabaqat al-Mujtahideen. So which ulama of the madhab are above others, and who, how they categorized. So now there's a famous categorization by the great, there's no doubt about this, by the great Ottoman scholar Ibn Kamal Basha, right? Or Pasha with the P again. So Ibn Kamal Basha, author of a number of excellent works, useful works. Tafsir, I haven't read his tafsir. Anyway, I'd like to get it anyway. So Ibn Kamal Basha categorized some of the scholars of the madhab, major ones, into these, I think, 7 broad categories. And so, for example, Ibn Abidin, in his Sharh Uqud Rasm al-Mufti, discusses these, expands on them. Scholars after them objected, and rightfully so. Ibn Kamal Basha's Taqsim has issues. It has, one of the first things is that he doesn't, it's clearly mentioned in the books of our school, that for example, Imam Abu Yusuf and Imam Muhammad, each of them has the rutbah of a mujtahid mutlaq, and they're not of that category in the tabaqat of Ibn Kamal Basha. So you've got, the 2 scholars wrote quite a bit on it. You've got Imam Abdul Hayy al-Laknawi, who is an excellent Indian scholar, rahimahullah ta'ala, and is a non-controversial figure, so that's good. But radiallahu anhu, he passed away at 39, but achieved a lot in those years. Like the man was like a man of just focus and constantly, to the point, Dr. Salah Abul Hajj, he told us that he went to Lucknow. There was some convention, and because he's done a lot of editing of Imam Abdul Hayy Lucknow's books, so they called him, and he said that. So he lived, I think he lived in Farangi Mahal, he was from a wealthy family, and his own room where he did his work had 2 exits, 2 doors, and so he'd go through one exit to go to the mosque, and go through another exit to go do something else. And so he had a set of sandals at each door, so he doesn't waste time carrying the sandals from one place to another. That's literally, that's, if you look at his Rasail, amazing. He's done a lot of work. His Rasail are printed in 3 large volumes. He's got many, and his Fatawa is an excellent collection of Fatawa, right? Very useful if you get hold of that. Many shuruh. He's got his Sharh Umdat al-Ri'ayah on Sharh al-Wiqaya, and he started a more detailed one, but he didn't complete it, rahimahullah ta'ala. Very useful set of notes on the Hidayah. So anyway, so he's got a criticism of Ibn Kamal Basha's Tabaqat, as does someone called Bahauddin, what's his name? the author of Nadhuratul Haqq. Nadhuratul Haqq, Nadhura means telescope. So this is a mas'ala that he this is a mas'ala that he dealt with about in the time of the year, in the places where the shafaq doesn't disappear. Is Isha obligatory or not? And yes, it is, right? And he does tahqiq of this mas'ala in his book Nadhuratul Haqq. Bahauddin and what's his name? Ya Rabb. It's right there. I can see the book. I'll show you the text next week anyway. And Al-Marjani, there you are. So Bahauddin Al-Marjani. So this is a text worth getting. So he was a strange mix of things. The first part of the book is a critique of the tabaqat, which is excellent. Then he has a section which is not really that great, almost like a Salafi kind of approach to some aspects of fiqh. And then he's got the excellent tahqiq on this mas'ala. But we'll be looking at a few things that they've said, inshallah, and some of the other issues. And I think that's it. Let's call it a day. So inshallah we'll have one more session, look at a few things, and we may start the actual text and this introduction and a few other things next week, or we might start it on Thursday. But don't think that these matters are just superfluous. No, they're not, because like I said, when you understand the worth and value of something, you benefit much more. And as opposed to just seeing a list of names, that each name carries its weight, each text carries its weight, right? Okay, let's so questions. Do you have any questions? You can open your mics if you want, and you can ask questions. Just type in the chat box. Just type Q if you do, and then save everyone trying to jump on it at once. Any questions? Can we get access to document? Let me ask. As I said, I'll ask Sheikh Faraz, see if he wants to update it or not. Yeah. No questions? All right, if you have a question, just unmute your mic. Okay. No. Okay, that's fine. No questions. Allah yabarik fikum jami'an. Okay, we'll call it a day here, inshallah ta'ala. We'll continue on Sunday, and we'll start the text proper soon, inshallah. Allah bless you all, and we shall see you next week, on Sunday, inshallah. Wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam, walhamdulillahi rabbil alameen. ربنا تقبل منا إنك أنت السميع العليم وتب علينا إنك أنت التواب الرحيم وصلى الله على سيدنا محمد وعلى آله وسلم. Okay, السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.